some of the other biggest myths within exercise that you've come across in writing this book?
Gosh, there are so many. I had to actually limit
Really?
it to 10. So I think if you want to understand physical activity and exercise, you also have to understand inactivity. And I think one of the biggest myths out there is that you need 8 hours of sleep a night, and that sitting is the new smoking. That basically, and if you think about those two different myths, why is it that we're constantly told to sleep more and to sit less? Actually, it seems a little contradictory to me, right? And it turns out that that let's take sitting first. So, there are all these, these slogans like "sitting is the new smoking" and it's really bad for you. And every time you sit in your chair, you lose 2 hours of your life and whatever. Turns out that all animals sit, right? My dog sits, cows sit, chickens sit, every animal sits, and hunter-gatherers also sit. In fact, if you some of my students actually put sensors on hunter-gatherers, and when we're doing some research in farmers as well, but they sit just as much as Westerners. So sitting there's nothing special about being about today's life. It's sitting. It's that we sit all day long and don't do anything when we're not sitting, right? So if you and furthermore, the big difference is not so much how much we sit, but how we sit. So it turns out that people who, if you get up every once in a while, right, interrupted sitting is actually much more healthy than non-interrupted sitting for the same amount of time. So in other words, two people might, in the West, people sit for an average about 40 minutes at about, whereas hunter-gatherers, for example, or farmers in Africa where we work, get up every about 10, 15 minutes. And when you do that, it's like turning on the engine of your car. You don't drive it around the block. You're turning on all kinds of cellular mechanisms. You lower blood sugar levels. All kinds of genes get activated. And it turns out that is by far the most important way to sit. So just get up every once in a while. Just pee frequently, make a cup of tea, pet your dog, whatever.
Thinking when I'm on planes and I've got a long flight.
Yeah, I always sit in the aisle, right? So I can get up a lot, always. And
what about sleep then?
So sleep is another interesting one. So this idea that that you need 8 hours of sleep has been around for a long time. It's been around basically since the Industrial Revolution. But if you actually, so colleagues in my field, so in evolutionary medicine, have put sensors on people who don't have all the things that we're told have destroyed sleep. So think about it. We're told that TV and lights and our phones and all these things are preventing us from sleeping. Edison destroyed sleep, right? So when you put sensors on people who don't have any electricity and they don't have TVs and they don't have phones and they don't have any of these gadgetry, right? Electricity. It turns out they sleep like 6 to 7 hours a night, and they don't nap. So this idea that natural human beings sleep 8 hours a night is just nonsense. It's just not true. And furthermore, when you start looking at the data, 7 hours. If you graph sort of how many hours a night you sleep on the x-axis and sort of some outcome like cardiovascular disease or just how likely you are to die. It's kind of a U-shaped curve. So people who don't get much sleep are in trouble. But the bottom of that curve is pretty much always about 7 hours. So people actually do better if they sleep 7 hours rather than 8 hours. And yet we're told that if you don't sleep 8 hours, there's something wrong, right?
So you can oversleep.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's also some complexity to this too, because of course people who are ill might be sleeping more, and so there's some biases that creep into how you analyze the data. But basically, it turns out that 7 is for most people optimal. But there's a lot of variation, right? Teenagers sleep more, older people sleep less. It's complicated.